9 tickets. 1 struggling mother. 1 judge who listens before he rules. The courtroom was packed that morning. The soft shuffle of papers, the distant hum of cameras, and the faint echo of rain against the tall windows of Providence Municipal Court. Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses, scanning the list before him. His tone, calm but firm, carried across the room. Next case, Elena Rodriguez. A young woman stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than 30, though the exhaustion on her face made her look older. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small envelope, the same one that had summoned her here today. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she answered, "Good morning, Your Honor." "Good morning," Judge Caprio replied kindly. "You have 9 traffic violations, is that correct?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The murmurs from the audience rippled quietly through the courtroom. 9 violations. That usually meant fines, license suspension, maybe even a car impound. But something about her demeanor stopped the usual rhythm of the room. There was no arrogance, no defiance, only fear. Fear mixed with fatigue, the kind that comes from fighting too many invisible battles. Judge Caprio tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Elena," he said softly, "how did it get this bad?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any gavel. She blinked rapidly, caught off guard. "Your Honor, I don't know how to start." "Just start with the truth," he said, leaning forward. "I'm listening." The cameras zoomed in. The courtroom leaned closer. Everyone was waiting for the usual excuses: traffic, work, bad luck. But Elena didn't speak right away. Her eyes welled up, and she pressed her lips together, as if holding back years of words that had nowhere to go. Judge Caprio's expression softened. "Take your time," he said gently. She inhaled shakily. "It wasn't about ignoring the law, Your Honor. I was just trying to survive." A hush fell over the room. Even the sound of typing from the clerk's desk stopped. The judge set his pen down. "Survive?" he repeated quietly. Elena nodded. Her voice cracked. "Yes, sir. I never meant to end up here, but every time I tried to fix one problem, 3 more showed up." The judge leaned back slowly, his gaze steady, thoughtful. No one moved. No one whispered. The tension was no longer about punishment, it was about understanding. And as Elena's voice trembled into silence, Judge Caprio knew this wouldn't be a simple case about tickets. This was something deeper. Something that would leave every person in that courtroom silent. Elena's story didn't start with 9 tickets. It started with 1. A single piece of paper slipped under her windshield on a freezing January morning. She had parked outside her second job, a small diner where she worked the night shift, just long enough to walk her son's homework to the counter and grab her uniform from the trunk. When she came back, the ticket was already there. $50 she didn't have. That first ticket was followed by another and then another. She told herself she'd pay them when her next check came, but the next check was already spoken for: rent, groceries, her son's asthma medication, and the aging car that coughed and rattled every morning but still got her where she needed to go. Every day was a balancing act. She'd drop her son Mateo off at school just after dawn, then rush to her morning cleaning shift at the hospital. By afternoon she was at the diner, pouring coffee for people who never looked twice at her name tag. Between jobs, she'd close her eyes in the parking lot, resting for 15 minutes before the next shift. The car was her lifeline. Without it, everything would fall apart. But it was also her downfall. When the transmission began to slip, she'd park in spots closer to the entrance, even when they weren't strictly legal. 5 minutes won't hurt, she'd whisper. But 5 minutes always turned into 10, and 10 minutes turned into another ticket. Still she kept moving. Until one night when life threw something even heavier her way. Mateo fell sick, a deep, wheezing cough that sent her rushing him to the emergency room. He was admitted for severe asthma. She never left his side that night. And when morning came, the court date she'd been dreading slipped her mind entirely. That one missed court appearance changed everything. The fines multiplied. Each unpaid ticket became a new fee. The letters started coming faster. 1, then 3, then 5 at a time. Each one colder than the last. Final notice, suspension warning, court action pending. At first she tried calling. But every call ended the same way: long holds, confusing legal terms, more numbers she didn't understand. She began to dread the mail, the phone, even her own car. Every envelope felt like another reminder that she was failing. By the time she stood in Judge Caprio's courtroom, she wasn't just fighting fines. She was fighting exhaustion, guilt, and a system that had forgotten her humanity. Judge Caprio listened quietly, his hands folded, his eyes kind but focused. You missed your first court date because your son was in the hospital? He asked softly. Elena nodded, barely able to look up. Yes, Your Honor. He couldn't breathe that night. I didn't think about anything else. The judge's brow furrowed. And after that? She sighed. After that, I started falling behind. The letters got scarier. I thought maybe if I ignored them long enough, they'd stop coming. A small, sympathetic smile touched his face. They never do they? No, sir, she whispered. I was just trying to survive. The courtroom was silent. The clerks, the officers, even the cameras seemed to pause, waiting. Judge Caprio took off his glasses for a moment, rubbing the bridge of his nose. His voice, when it came, was gentle but heavy. Sometimes, he said slowly, people don't break the law breaks them. Elena closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. And for the first time in years she felt like someone had seen her, not as a list of violations, not as a name on a summons, but as a person trying to hold her world together. Outside the rain had stopped. Inside something was beginning to change. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. The courtroom waited in heavy silence. The rain that had filled the morning with noise was gone now, replaced by stillness so complete that even the hum of the ceiling lights seemed to fade away. Elena, he said softly, I want to understand something. She glanced up nervously. Yes, Your Honor? He folded his hands. I don't usually ask this in traffic court, but what's been happening in your life? Outside of all these tickets. What's really going on? The question caught her off guard. For a second, she just stared at him, as if he had reached into her life and pulled out the one question no one else had cared to ask. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She swallowed hard. Her voice faltered. It's hard to talk about. Take your time, the judge said. You're not on trial here, I just want to understand. She nodded slowly, her eyes lowering to the worn floor tiles beneath her feet. Then, almost in a whisper, she began. My husband, she said. His name was Daniel. The name hung in the air like a ghost. He was killed 2 years ago, Your Honor, she continued, her voice trembling now. A car accident. It happened on Broad Street, the same street where I got one of those tickets. A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. Even the officers sitting by the wall shifted in their seats. Judge Caprio's eyes softened instantly. I'm so sorry to hear that, he said gently. What happened? Her fingers tightened around the small paper envelope in her hands, the same one that had brought her here. He was driving home from work late at night. A drunk driver ran a red light. They told me he died instantly. Her voice cracked. The man who hit him, he walked away with a broken wrist. No one spoke. The sound of her quiet crying filled the room. Elena wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed to be breaking down in front of strangers. After that night, everything fell apart. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. I was angry at everything, at the world, at God, at myself. And then, the bill started coming. She exhaled shakily, trying to hold her composure. I kept working. I told my son it would be okay. But some days I just sat in the car outside the diner before my shift and cried until my face hurt. I didn't know how to keep going. The judge didn't interrupt. He didn't glance at the clock or shuffle papers. He just listened, really listened. Elena continued, her voice trembling but steadying with each word. That's when the ticket started. I was rushing from work to school, trying to pick up my son before daycare closed. Some nights I'd park anywhere I could. Other times I forgot to move the car on street cleaning days. And the letters started coming. She looked down, her knuckles white. At first I tried to pay them. But every envelope was like another reminder that I'd lost control of my life. I stopped opening them. Every letter felt like another punishment. Her words hit the courtroom like a slow, invisible wave. I didn't want to be here, she said, tears pooling again. I didn't want to be the person who gave up. But I didn't have anyone left. My family's back in Mexico. My husband was all I had. Judge Caprio's voice was low now, full of empathy. You were carrying all this alone, weren't you? She nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor. I didn't know who to ask for help. For a long moment the judge said nothing. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a defendant, but a woman standing in the ruins of her life, trying to rebuild with nothing but courage and exhaustion. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. You've been punished twice, he said. Once by fate, and once by a system that forgot to ask why. The courtroom went utterly still. The cameras caught the look on his face, not anger, not pity, but quiet sorrow. The kind that comes from realizing that mercy shouldn't be rare. Elena wiped her eyes again, but she didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Judge Caprio leaned back, taking off his glasses, letting the silence settle. It was a silence that said more than any verdict could, a silence of shared humanity, of pain finally seen. And for the first time since her husband's death, Elena Rodriguez didn't feel invisible. She felt heard. She felt human. And that moment, that fragile, trembling moment of truth, left the entire courtroom speechless. The silence in Judge Caprio's courtroom lingered like mist, thick, heavy, and filled with the kind of emotion words can barely touch. For a few long seconds no one spoke. Then Judge Caprio cleared his throat softly and adjusted his glasses. "Elena," he said, his voice gentle, "you mentioned your son earlier. How old is he?" "He's 8, Your Honor," she replied, her voice small but steady. Caprio nodded slowly. 8, he repeated, as though the number itself carried weight. "Tell me about him." Elena hesitated. She hadn't expected that question. He's everything I have left," she said, her voice breaking halfway through. "He's smart, funny, too curious for his own good sometimes." She gave a trembling laugh, then quickly wiped her eyes. "He wants to be a firefighter when he grows up, just like his dad wanted to be." The courtroom stirred quietly, a collective ache spreading through the room. Caprio's expression softened. His eyes shimmered behind the reflection of the overhead lights. "A firefighter," he said thoughtfully. "That's a brave dream." Elena nodded, her lips quivering. "He tells me he wants to save people. He says, 'Mom, I want to be like Daddy, he always tried to help.'" Her voice cracked again, but she forced the words out. "He doesn't remember much about him, but he knows enough to be proud." The judge leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the bench. "Does he know you're here today?" She swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. He asked me this morning if you were going to send me to jail." That single sentence seemed to rip through the room like a quiet thunderclap. The gallery fell utterly still. The clerk stopped typing. A man in the back lowered his head. Caprio's face changed, compassion deepening into something heavier, almost personal. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him no," Elena whispered, tears spilling freely now. "I told him that maybe you'd understand, that maybe you'd see I didn't mean to do wrong. She struggled to breathe between words. "I just ran out of strength." Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the podium, every muscle in her body fighting to keep her upright. "I know I messed up, Your Honor," she said through the tears. "I know it. But I never stopped trying. I never stopped trying to be a good mom." A lump formed in Judge Caprio's throat. He took off his glasses and placed them gently on the desk, his eyes glistening with empathy. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said quietly, "you don't have to convince me that you're a good mother. I can see it." The words hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her shoulders shook and she covered her face with her hands. Caprio waited patiently. Then after a pause he asked, "Is your son here today?" She hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor, he's sitting right there." The judge followed her gaze. In the second row, a small boy stood on the edge of his seat, holding a little red toy fire truck tightly in both hands. His dark hair was neatly combed, his shirt a size too big. When the judge smiled at him, the boy blinked shyly and waved. Caprio's expression melted completely. "Would you like to come up here, young man?" The boy looked at his mother, who nodded softly. Slowly he walked up, his little sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He stopped just before the bench, clutching his toy tighter, unsure what to do. Caprio leaned forward, lowering his voice so it was warm, almost grandfatherly. "What's your name, son?" "Mateo," he said, barely audible. "Mateo," the judge repeated with a smile. "That's a strong name. Do you know what your mom's doing here today?" The boy nodded timidly. "She got in trouble with the car." A soft ripple of laughter, tender, not mocking, passed through the courtroom. Caprio chuckled too, shaking his head. "That's right. And do you think she's a good mom?" Mateo looked up at his mother, then back at the judge. "She's the best mom in the world," he said firmly. "She works all the time. She never gives up." The entire courtroom seemed to exhale at once. A woman in the back dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Even one of the officers looked away, pretending to check something on his clipboard. Caprio nodded slowly, visibly moved. "Well, Mateo, I think you might be the bravest man in this courtroom today." The boy smiled shyly. Elena's tears flowed freely now, but this time they weren't from shame, they were from the weight finally being lifted. The judge turned his attention back to her. His voice was softer now, heavy with thought. "You know," he said, I've been sitting on this bench for a long time. I've seen anger, defiance, even cruelty. But what I see here today is something very different: courage. He paused, letting the words sink in. Sometimes, he continued, doing what's right isn't written in the book of laws. It's written in the book of life. The sentence echoed through the room like a prayer. Elena looked up at him through red, tear-streaked eyes. Thank you, Your Honor. Caprio shook his head gently. No, Mrs. Rodriguez. Thank you for reminding us why we're all here. The law exists to serve people, not to break them. He looked at the little boy still holding his fire truck. Mateo, you take care of your mom, okay? The boy nodded proudly. I will. Caprio smiled, then glanced around the courtroom. For a few seconds no one moved. No one wanted to break the spell of that moment. The moment when justice stopped being about fines and forms, and became something far greater. And as Elena reached down to take her son's hand, the audience saw what Judge Caprio saw. Not a defendant, not a case number, but a family trying to rise again. The courtroom was still, bathed in bright light pouring through the high windows. It wasn't a scene about guilt anymore, it was about grace. And in that silence, every person present knew they had just witnessed something sacred. The kind of moment that changes how you see justice, compassion, and the quiet power of one human heart choosing mercy over judgment. The air inside the courtroom felt sacred now, charged with quiet reverence. No one dared to whisper, no one moved. Even the cameras, always cold and clinical, seemed softer somehow, as if they understood they were capturing something much greater than a legal proceeding. Judge Frank Caprio took a long breath, his gaze shifting between Elena and her son. He rested his hands on the bench, fingers gently interlaced, and looked down for a moment, lost in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice carried both the authority of law and the warmth of a father. Mrs. Rodriguez, he began, I've been sitting in this chair for many years. I've seen all kinds of people stand before me, some who make excuses, some who show no remorse. But today, he paused, searching for the right words. Today I see something I don't often see in this courtroom. I see strength. Elena blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. Caprio nodded. You've been carrying the world on your shoulders, working 2 jobs, raising your boy, grieving a husband you lost too soon. And through all that, you still stood here today, honest and humble. That tells me something about your character. He glanced toward the ceiling, recalling something distant. My father used to say, if you want to know a person's worth, don't look at what they have, look at what they've survived. And you, Mrs. Rodriguez, have survived more than most. Elena's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The judge leaned back, the faintest smile touching his face. Now about these 9 tickets. The courtroom tensed. Everyone knew what was supposed to happen next. Fines, deadlines, perhaps even a suspended license. But Judge Caprio wasn't a man who followed scripts. He lifted one of the papers in front of him, glanced at the total amount, then set it down with a quiet sigh. I could fine you hundreds of dollars today. That's what the law allows me to do. But laws, Mrs. Rodriguez, are meant to serve people, not destroy them. The audience stirred. Elena's breath hitched. Caprio continued, his tone now firm but compassionate. So here's my decision. All 9 tickets, every single one, are dismissed. A gasp swept through the courtroom. Elena froze. She looked at the judge as if she hadn't heard right. I beg your pardon, Your Honor, she whispered. He smiled gently. You heard me correctly. I'm dismissing all charges. Elena's hands flew to her face. Tears spilled freely as her shoulders shook. The relief that had been building for years finally broke free, pouring out in quiet sobs. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He reached for his pen, writing something quickly on the file before him. And one more thing, he said. Instead of collecting fines from Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm asking the court to donate the equivalent amount to the Providence Community Relief Fund, to help families who are struggling just like hers. The courtroom erupted in applause. It started softly, a few claps from the back row, then grew louder, fuller, until the entire room was standing. Elena lowered her hands, trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what to say, she managed through her tears. Caprio's eyes softened. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll keep fighting the way you always have. You've done nothing wrong by trying to survive. Her son Mateo stood clutching his little red fire truck, staring up at the judge in awe. Caprio smiled down at him and said, Mateo, come here a second. The boy hesitated, then hurried forward. The judge reached over the bench and placed a kind hand on his shoulder. Your mom is a remarkable woman, he said. I want you to remember that. This isn't punishment, son. This is a new beginning, for both of you. The boy nodded solemnly, then did something no one expected. He threw his arms around the judge. Gasps turned into tears all over again. Caprio gently patted his back, smiling through the emotion that now filled the room. Elena covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The sight of her son hugging the man who had just given them hope was too much. She broke down completely, not from pain this time but from gratitude that felt too big for words. When the applause finally subsided, Judge Caprio looked around the room, at the officers, the clerks, the strangers who had come to watch what they thought would be an ordinary case. His voice, when it returned, carried quiet power. "I want everyone here to remember something," he said. "The law can correct mistakes. But only kindness can heal hearts." The room fell silent again. Tears glistened everywhere, even on faces that usually hid behind professionalism. Caprio gave a final nod to Elena. "You go home to your son, Mrs. Rodriguez. The world's been unfair long enough. It's time someone gave you a little fairness back." She nodded, still crying, her words tangled with emotion. Thank you, Your Honor. You don't know what this means to us." "Oh, I think I do," he said softly. As she turned to leave, the entire courtroom stood, not because they had to but because they wanted to. They weren't watching a judge that day. They were witnessing a human being using power to lift another, not crush them. And as the mother and son walked out into the daylight hand in hand, the sound of applause followed them, a sound that felt less like celebration and more like redemption. Behind the bench, Judge Caprio sat quietly for a moment longer, eyes distant, heart full. Then he whispered under his breath, just loud enough for himself to hear. "Justice served, and mercy remembered." The sound of the gavel had long faded, but the echo of what happened in that courtroom lingered, not just in the room itself, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. As Elena and her son stepped outside, the late afternoon sun washed over them. The storm from the morning had passed, and the city that once felt like a cage now looked like a promise. She held Mateo's hand tightly, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she was running, she felt like she was finally free. Her son looked up at her, clutching his little red fire truck. "Mom," he said softly, "the judge was nice." She smiled through tears. "Yes, baby. He was." They kept walking down the courthouse steps, every step lighter than the last. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something inside them had. The narrator's voice returns, calm, reflective, full of quiet strength. In a world quick to condemn, sometimes mercy is the most powerful verdict. Images fade in, Judge Caprio watching them leave with a faint smile, the courtroom now empty but still glowing with the warmth of what had just taken place. "Judge Frank Caprio has spent decades behind that bench," the voice continues. "He's seen the guilty and the innocent, the careless and the broken. But what sets him apart isn't how many fines he's dismissed, it's how many hearts he's restored." Pause. The camera lingers on Caprio's chair, empty now, sunlight cutting through the blinds, the scales of justice faintly illuminated in the background. "Because true justice," the voice says softly, "isn't about punishment. It's about understanding the story behind every struggle." The music swells gently, warm, emotional, hopeful. Elena Rodriguez walked into that courtroom fearing the worst. She walked out reminded that compassion still exists, that even within the walls of law humanity can win. The narrator's tone deepens, connecting directly with the viewer. Friends, if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Someone who needs to be reminded that empathy still has a place in this world. A final beat of silence. Then the closing line, simple and powerful. Next week, another story where Judge Caprio turned law into humanity. The screen fades to black as a quote appears in white lettering. "Justice without compassion is just procedure." The music fades. The silence that follows isn't empty, it's full of meaning.